Okay, so we're going to go over walls today. Walls are obviously your main kind of building block for your 3D model here, so there's quite a bit that you can build into them, and it's also one of the more important components to build correctly, just because you're going to be using them consistently, and if you don't build them correctly, you're going to have quite a bit of problems when you get further down the line. So. I'm just going to hide those so when I zoom to fit, it'll surround my project and not zoom out too far. Okay, so if I go up here and click the wall icon, it shows me defaulted to basic wall generic 8-inch. So if I click this, it'll show me all of the basic wall types that I have in my project here. Um, Within the properties, I can set what the base constraint is, so what level is the bottom of the wall on, base offset, so if I don't want it to be right on level 1, maybe I want it to be 6 inches or a foot or something like that off of level 1. For whatever reason, I can change the base constraint or the base offset there. Top constraint right now it shows as unconnected. When things are unconnected, this unconnected height becomes a field that you can select, and this basically just sets the entire wall's height. So if I'm on level 1, 20 feet, it'll go from level 1 up 20 feet. If my base offset is, say, 2 feet off of level 1, my wall height is still going to be 20 feet. It's just the top is going to be at 22 foot because the bottom is offset by 2 foot. So if you have a base offset, you need to take that kind of into account when you're doing your unconnected height. But I can also make the top constraint level 2, and it shows me that the height is 10 foot then, because the distance between level 1 and level 2 is 10 foot. Now I do have a top offset that I can use as well, which is basically the same as the base offset. The rest of this is kind of just basic data. So image, comments, that sort of stuff is all similar to components and windows and doors and that sort of thing. It'll give you some generic information on the wall once we've created one. Comments is just a text field that we can type in whatever we really want to. Okay, so then under edit type, there's a couple things here. So structure we'll get into here in a second. That's the main method for building your wall. Wrapping and inserts and ends I will also show you here in a minute. But then the graphics and coarse scale fill pattern, those are all things to get the model to kind of look the way that you want it. Absorbance and roughness, these are more for your building, and if you were building an analytical model, you can set the overall thermal resistance and U factor and all of that sort of stuff for the wall, so that Revit can take that into account when doing the analytics. All of these are different kind of schedulable kind of fields. So you could do an entire schedule and sort by keynotes. You can insert model numbers and all of that sort of thing in these fields here. For walls, a lot of these kind of become a little bit less useful, but these are all similar to doors, windows, components, that sort of thing. So you probably don't usually have a manufacturer that you want to put in for an entire wall assembly. You might have one for a material specifically, but depending on how you want to build your model, you might just associate a manufacturer with a wall type, and that manufacturer just corresponds to the exterior cladding or something like that. You can do it that way. So a lot of these are a little bit more suited to individual elements, like a door or a window or that sort of thing. But they're all basically text fields that you can type something in, and then you could schedule based on manufacturer, or you could schedule and just have this as a field that is shows up within the schedule. So I'm going to draw a wall here real quick. Okay, so you can see right now it's just kind of this blank rectangle, and I'm on coarse detail level. I'm going to change that to fine, and you'll notice nothing really happens right now because it's just an 8-inch wall. There's no layers to this wall whatsoever. So I'm going to go under Edit Type, and I'm going to duplicate this wall because I don't want to get rid of the 8-inch wall type. I just want to create my own. So I'm gonna name this, let's say, brick on wood stud. I don't believe there's a generic brick on wood stud, and I'm gonna also give it a 3.5-inch thing on the end here that'll tell me how thick the stud is for this wall. So I'll hit OK, and then I'm gonna go into the structure here. So since we duplicated the 8-inch generic wall, we'll see that this is 8 inches thick here, and there's only one layer. And then we've got our core boundaries on either side of the structure here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to 3.5 inches. Since this is my structural layer, this will be my wood stud layer. And then I'm going to insert a couple layers here. So I'm going to make this 7/16 inch OSB, and then we'll say this is, then I'll end up with, say, a 1-inch air barrier or air gap, and then I will have 3 5/8 brick. So what I'm going to do is these core boundaries come into play, and I'll show you kind of how those work here in a little bit, but it's important to know where your core boundaries are within this assembly. Typically, you're probably going to want to keep your core boundaries around your structural pieces. So in this instance, a good place to have them would be around the sheathing and the stud layer, because it's not very often that you're going to design your entire building and then all of a sudden your entire exterior's structural system is going to change. If that's the case, you pretty much know you've got a lot of work ahead of you to chase down, just because if you're changing your structure that late in a project, that's probably a major change. And then I'm going to keep all this sort of stuff to the exterior. So you can see up here, this is my exterior side, this is my interior side. And then I'm going to insert one more, and I'm going to put my 1/2-inch drywall down here at the bottom. So I can apply materials to this if I want. So let's say I'm going to make this my brick material, so I'll just say brick common, hit OK. And then I'm going to assign this to a finish layer and assign this to the other finish layer. Okay, so I've got structure. I'm going to make this a substrate, and then this is going to be a thermal and air layer. So I've kind of identified the functions of these, and then I've assigned a material to the outside here, and I'm going to assign a material here and call this gypsum wallboard. The other portion that is nice to assign a material to is your main structural layer. So this 3.5 inches, it's nice to assign something to this, because all these other ones you're not going to see in terms of a rendering. You're not going to see it unless there is a kind of cut hatch pattern that you want to see in your sections. Then you could apply something here with a graphics, a cut pattern. But we'll get into wall sections and that sort of stuff later, and that becomes a little bit less relevant just for tagging purposes and that sort of thing. So I'm going to apply to this structural layer. I'm going to create a new material. So create material, and then I'm going to rename this, and I would recommend always putting a dash and a space in front of any materials that you create so that they all sort to the top. That way you don't have to go through this big list trying to remember what you named stuff. All of your custom materials jump to the very top of the list. And I'm going to call this, I'm actually just going to call this poche, because I'm going to probably end up using this material for all of my walls, regardless of whether it's a wood stud or maybe it's metal stud and I changed for whatever reason. I'm going to just call this poche. And then under cut pattern, I'm going to change this graphics cut pattern to solid fill. Okay, and I'm going to keep this dark gray. I kind of like the look of the dark gray as opposed to a black fill. And so I'll hit OK, and then OK, and back all the way out. And now you can see this wall is very different now. So what we just did with the graphics and the poche fill creates this dark gray band. So whenever I create walls here, whoops, I'm going to change this to my brick on wood stud. And if for whatever reason it's not the correct orientation, I can click the wall and then click these arrows and it'll flip it. So when I create these walls, now I have a pochade stud cavity, which helps all of your walls pop a little bit, helps for the graphics and the overall kind of look of your plans there. Then I've got all of the layers that I just built in here. So I've got my gypsum board, I got my stud layer, my 7/16 OSB, my 1-inch air barrier, and then my brick on the outside here. So I've just created this wall assembly, and under fine detail I can see all of those. If I go to coarse, it goes back to basically what that 8-inch generic wall looks like. It's not going to show all of the little layers there. And that's where this graphics thing comes in. So if you wanted to just see the generic wall with some sort of hatch pattern or something like that on that, you can put that in here. So if I wanted, for whatever reason, this to show up as concrete, I can hit apply, and now this starts to show up as concrete. If the hatch pattern is a little too bold, right now it's displaying as black, I could make this like a real subtle kind of gray and apply it. Now this all starts to fade towards the back just a little bit. I would recommend, before you get into too light of hatch patterns, run something off of your printer or plotter to make sure that that you're going to be able to see it, because some of these, they look nice on screen, but when you plot them, they're barely visible, and that can get to be a little bit of a problem if you didn't realize that, and print a whole bunch of sets out, and then you don't get to see any of your hatch patterns. So I'm actually going to remove that because I don't want to see it as concrete. Okay, so we've got, I'm going to change this back to fine so we can see what the detail level is doing here. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of how you build the structural layers of this. Now, these wrapping at ends and wrappings at inserts, right now, if you see, when I just terminate a wall here, I get just a chopped end. So right now, what this is showing is you're going to end up seeing the studs, seeing all the ends of the layers just truncated there. So at the ends, we have wrapping as none. If I change this to exterior and hit apply, that returns the finish layer, and anything basically outside of my kind of core boundary. So that's another place where the core boundary comes into play. Since my core boundary is set right here, what it's doing is it's taking everything outside that core boundary and returning it, and then continuing this interior finish across. So in this instance, if you have a lot of conditions like this, we probably want this OSB to return as well. So if I come in here and edit structure and bring this up beyond my core boundary and hit OK, now that returns as well. So that can be useful if you have walls that kind of just terminate and you want a certain look to them. And then I'm going to throw a basic window in here and show you how this works. Okay, so I'm going to throw, there's this window in here. I've got all my layers just kind of terminating there. If I go into wrapping at inserts, I can say I want exterior, interior, or both. I'm going to do both and hit OK. And so you can see this returns the chipboard inside. Now the reason it's coming into the brick is because of where my window is set here. So within Windows, and I'll get into this in a little bit, this is set to 3/4 of an inch. If, let's say, I make this 3 inches and hit OK, that pulls this back a little bit, and now this starts to return to a little bit better location. And then this thickens up where my exterior is, because it's basically returning the exterior cladding back to wherever my window is set. So that's something that you can play with Windows, but it interacts within the wall family as well. So I'm going to get rid of this and go back in to the structure component here. Now down here at the bottom there are defaults at wrapping. You can set those here as well, but it's the exact same thing as what we were looking at right here. So down at the very bottom here, if I hit preview, I can see as I build this wall kind of what the layers are looking like, how the wrapping is at the very ends. So if I start creating new layers, I can do that here. But this is looking at it in plan view. If I change this little drop down here, I can hit section view, and now I'm starting to look at this in section view. I can also zoom in on this to see different things here. So what this is for is all these tools here. So you can insert sweeps, you can insert reveals, that sort of thing is something that you can build into the wall type. So if you have a situation where maybe you have a flat site and you're running with a brick wall and it's got a sill that sits on top of the brick at about 3 feet, something like that, we can come in here, hit sweeps, and then hit add a sweep. And then right now the profile is just default. You can click the drop down and see what these kind of defaults are. You can also load one in if you create your own. So I'm going to hit sill precast 5 inch and hit apply. So here is a 5 inch sill precast profile, and right now it says distance is 0. So the very bottom of this is sitting right at the bottom of the wall, because this is taking from the base. I can change it to the top and it'll jump this all the way to the top of the wall if I want. But I'm going to change this to, say, 3 feet. And then we'll hit apply, and that's going to jump up to 3 feet there. I'm saying it's on the exterior side. I want this to be a brick cap. I don't want this to be on the inside over here by my chipboard. I can also set this back or offset it. Basically what these do is if I do a 1 inch and then maybe I do this 3 inches, hit apply, so you can see it jumps this direction. And I'll go back to 0 there and go back to the 0 there. Okay, so that pops through there. Whether it's cuttable or not, so it does cut the wall. We want that to cut the wall because obviously it's inserting into the wall. We don't want this to be running all the way through. This is an actual element that will sit within the wall, so it cuts the wall. And then cuttable is when you insert a window or a door. When that door comes down through here, is it going to cut through this element here? And almost always you want it cuttable. It's not very often you don't want a profile cuttable, because then you've got a concrete sill or whatever it is basically running straight through any openings that you're creating there. So I'll hit OK. And then I'm going to do a split region down here. So if I hit a split region right there, whoops, let's go back in here. I'm going to apply that real quick again. And bring that as well. cuttable, and say 3 feet. Okay. Okay. Let's go back in here. Alright, so split region. I'm going to apply that. So basically what this does is this is creating a division between the bottom here and then the top. So what I can do is, because this is shown as variable here, if I insert and make this finish 4, and let's say I want the top of this to be, I guess it doesn't really matter for these purposes. Let's just make it, we'll just make it concrete, CMU. We'll say okay. And what I need to do is basically select, I'm going to go modify, select this whole unit, and then hit assign layers, and then I can grab the very edge of this and click that, and make sure you do not hit escape when you're in this, and then hit modify. If you hit escape, it backs you out of this entire window. That's what I did just a minute ago when it backed the whole thing out and I had to create the sweep again. You'll end up losing everything that you did. So this is what we call a compound wall. So I have a brick below, a different material above, and I've created a split region here. If I want to change this height, I can click modify, click that little button, and then change this. Let's say I wanted it to be 3.5 feet. I could do that, and it'll change as I go along. I can create multiple split regions. I could change the material again if I wanted, and then reveals basically do the same thing as the sweep. It just cuts rather than creates a solid thing. So I'll show you what this looks like in kind of 3D here. So you now can see the edge of where that sweep is, and so now you see how that sweep is interacting with the wall. You can see where my split region is, where it changes materials there, and if I change this to realistic, you can see kind of how that's working. The problem with this is it's not too terribly often that you've got two materials that are the same exact thickness. Like your CMU and your brick cannot, because these are the same layer essentially, they have to be the same thickness. You cannot make this one 4 inches thick and this one 3 5/8. So if we go back into this wall here, I cannot make this top one thicker than this one. If you want to do that, you're getting into a stacked wall rather than a compound wall, and I'll show you basically some of the issues with that. But another issue with doing these compound walls here are there's not very often that you end up with a perfectly flat site. It occurs, probably more so in commercial than it does in the residential sector. But let's say I have a wall that I've got going along here, and then I've got a step in my foundation. If I have a step in my foundation, and whoops, I'm still on that, and let's flip this. Okay, so if I have a step in my foundation, you can already see the problem here. As soon as this drops, I have to create an entirely new wall type to change this to match up here. So if for whatever reason I wanted to use this and have this sweep going all the way around, I'd have to create another wall type, brick on wood stud, 3.5 inches, dash, 2 foot offset, or something like that. So that this would then, I'd go in, change the height of my sweep to 5 foot rather than 3 foot. It would jump up here, and then these would all interact together again. But if I have multiple steps within my foundation, now I'm getting into quite a few different wall types in here, and this list starts to build up pretty quickly. So I personally don't care for reveals and sweeps unless it's something that's going to be the exact same off of, say, off of the top of the wall. So if I'm creating this sweep, and say it's only a one-story building, and I know my eave height is going to be the exact same all the way around the entire building, I can say I want this to be 8 feet off of the top, and it will always be 8 feet off of the top. But then I also have the issue of the split region where my materials change. So I would still need to be creating a different wall type just to get my brick to jump up and line up with this one. So there's a lot of kind of inherent problems here, but if you didn't have the split region in different materials and basing it off of the same eave height, you could get these sweeps to work for you, as well as any reveals that you might happen to have if they're all the same height off of kind of your eave height. Or at least if you have a fairly consistent one that runs around quite a bit of your building, then that starts to work pretty well. The way I typically like to do things, and it's a little bit of extra work, but I personally feel like I have a little bit more control over things this way, and this probably is less useful if you have a whole bunch of people building a model together. Relying on other people to do this extra step can get a little hairy, but typically when I'm building a model, I'm the only one in it, so this works for me. So if others of you want to use it, you can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a wall, and let's say I'm actually going to do just an 8-inch generic wall to start. So I'm going to place that generic 8-inch wall, and I'm actually going to make it unconnected and make it 3 feet tall. Then I'm going to do another wall type, and let's say I make this one, let's make this one a 5-inch generic. And I'm going to change the location line to the finished interior side. And what I do when I change this location, it changes the point that I start drawing at. So because I'm on the interior side, I know that I'm going to grab at this point, and when I draw, I'm in line with that. So when I draw over the top of it, it gave me this little error message that says these two walls are overlapped right now, and that's fine. I'm going to change the base offset to 3 feet so that now these two walls kind of stand together. And this is basically what a stacked wall system looks like. So if I go to wall, all the way down here at the bottom, they have a basic stacked wall system, and what that is if I draw one of those in there, that is essentially what this looks like, only they don't have any materials, or they do have materials applied to it, it's just really dark there. So what stacked walls do, you can, if you go into the structure of a stacked wall, it's just asking you what two wall types that are already in this drop-down menu you're going to be using. So if this isn't changing, that's nice. You can kind of create you can create a stacked wall type, run it all the way around, and if you don't have any steps or any issues like that, then everything's going to work out just fine. But the stacked walls have a similar problem to what we have here. So what I typically like to do is I draw these two walls here, and I'm actually going to go into an elevation view so that I can see this. And this is basically what this extra step is for this. If I hit a dimension line and I'm going to hit tab. Right now it's going to default to the center line, but I'm going to hit tab to grab the very edge of this wall, and then hit tab to grab the other side of this upper wall. And when I click off of that, it's showing a 0 foot 0, yes, because I have it exactly lined up, so it should be 0 foot 0. And then I'm going to click this little lock, and what that's going to do is it's going to lock this 0 foot dimension in place so that it's always going to be 0 foot 0. And then I can delete this, and it's going to ask me, when I delete the dimension, do I also want to delete that lock that I put on there? I'm going to just hit OK. I don't want to hit unconstrain unless I want to get rid of that lock. So So I'll hit OK. Now, if I just grab this bottom piece here and I move this, the top one moves with it. So I've locked these two together, but now I also have the ability to come in here and adjust either one of these as I see fit. So I could come in and do a, let's say I wanted to do a base offset of say 3 feet. I can drop that down and then change this to 6 foot height. And now it's just kind of a matter of what headache do you really want to work with. Do you want to work with this where I can control the top and the bottom as I see fit, and always have that interior finish lined up? Or do you want to create a whole bunch of wall types and resolve this? I personally prefer this method, just because then it kind of keeps my browser here pretty open. Because if this is the same wall type all the way around, it just happens to step up and down, then I'd prefer to just have a single wall type here and then go through and adjust based on what the condition is, and similarly at the top. So that's how I prefer to work with them. Now since I only locked the very edge here, I could move this direction and it's not going to stay in line that way, but it's not very often that I have problems where I'm dragging something down the line. It's more an issue of, in plan, have I grabbed something and I want to say I'm changing the interior. If I have a room here and I want to change the dimension of the room by 6 inches and make this 17 foot 10, I want that wall to move with it and stay in line here. It's not very often that I'm dragging stuff left and right as opposed to this direction. You could also put a lock on the end if you wanted to keep it in line at the very end here, if that was a condition that you were concerned about. So if I drag this down here, but I always want this one to stay in line, I could always grab the end here and grab the end here and put a lock on that as well, and then get rid of that and say OK. And now if I shove stuff left and right and back and forth, it keeps this always where it is, and then also the other direction. So it's a little bit of extra work putting in the locks and that sort of stuff, but that's also something that you might not be able to rely on everybody that's in your model to do. If you're the model manager for stuff, a lot of times when you're the model manager, that's just all you end up doing. You don't end up actually contributing a ton of work to the actual project because there's so much going on in the model that you have to chase down issues and problems and stuff. So if you're the model manager, maybe that's just your job. You go through and any sort of stacked walls, you're locking those in place so that if anybody wants to move that sort of stuff, they have to go through the warning. It at least puts in a small bit of a fail-safe to get rid of potential problems. So, in a nutshell, that is walls.